Today I'll introduce minimum safety levels and service levels for key public services.
Well, let's give this some context. The government's planned public order bill will treat peaceful protests like knife and gang crime. Its Bill of Rights bill will reduce human rights protections and significantly reduce government accountability. And now it's planning new anti-strike laws which will reduce the right to take industrial action, forcing people to work against their will and allowing them to be sacked if they won't submit. Just think about that. These are all measures designed to restrict opportunities for individuals and groups to express their opposition to the government. The simple fact of the matter is this government has actually declared war on working people by attacking our long-standing British liberties. And it's no coincidence it's happening at the very moment workers across the country are uniting and saying enough is enough to the biggest drop in living standards since records began. A decade of wage stagnation, the highest level of taxation since the Second World War, the highest inflation in 40 years, soaring food banks, homelessness and fuel poverty. And instead of paying public sector workers a fair wage for a fair day's work, this Victorian government wants to rob them of their right to strike.
Well, I was going to say it's probably worth, because actually in some of the coverage of these strikes, what hasn't come through is the fact that the government has entirely accepted the independent pay review bodies' recommendations on what level to pay. No, but the independent pay review bodies, who actually don't apply in every area, but they do in the NHS, they took into account and they said, look, we used the projection of inflation, which was more or less correct, in order to make this pay recommendation. Now, the government has accepted it. It's the unions who've said, we're not accepting that independent pay review body. Now, if that's the case, they need to present evidence as to why that's not correct and they haven't accepted it.
It's just babbling bollocks. The body's recommendation was to give most NHS staff a pay rise amounting to roughly 4.8%. With inflation at more than 10%, it's just a crappy real terms pay cut on top of a decade of crappy real terms pay cuts. As for being independent, the government handpicks the members and sets the remit. And then it's delighted when they come back with another crappy real terms pay cut. If you want to know how independent these bodies are, just listen to Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed.
I want to make a comment about the independent pay review body because it's not independent. Well, what happened with that body is the government told them the amount of money that they could offer to the nurses, and so they capped the possible pay rise that was on offer. That's not independent. That's the government operating behind closed doors.
And if unfair, the government can just ignore the recommendations. Its own health minister has admitted it.
You know, we could have ignored the pay review body's recommendation. So the pay review body, you're right, we don't have to stick to the recommendation.